I decided to move into a new neighborhood with the love of my life. Everything was going so good until we get a notice in the mail. It's about the local HOA in our neighborhood. They want us to join. So we join. But what we didn't know, it was ran by the most tyrannical, absolute toxic woman I've ever came across. My boyfriend and I moved in together to our dream home with our dog Roxy. The first few days after the move was rather peaceful. We were adopting to our new home and the life that came with it, and naturally, we tried to blend into the neighborhood. Initially, we found out that there was an HOA. One that was run by a very questionable president, but one that was there for the greater good of everyone nevertheless, is what they say. My boyfriend and I looked into joining the HOA as soon as we heard about it from one of our neighbors, Lara, who kindly explained to us quite a few things about the whole concept of it. Firstly, joining it is not much of a choice because the HOA can set rules that the neighborhood has to follow, or else fines will be distributed to everybody, very generously. You not being part of the HOA doesn't mean you won't be fined. It just means you won't understand why, nor will you have a say in what you do or don't get fined for. Lara also told me that they were always in and out of debates with the HOA president, who was in charge of putting these rules into place because the happiness indicator had been going down ever since she took the lead. She would always enforce these pointless rules that seemed targeted towards the people that weren't her, quote, friends, or let's just say, not of her age category. Lara told me that the most of the people in the association had been there for years. There was barely a handful of people that had moved recently, and all of them were either in their 30s or younger. And the old residents didn't quite like the changes that were happening to the neighborhood after the arrival of the newbies. And the president of the HOA, who was supposed to keep the street in order, didn't like the changes either. I can say I was a bit nervous on my first meeting at the HOA, but the nerves dissipated a little bit after the president, Janet, decided that my boyfriend and I were worth a warm welcome that she had prepared beforehand. I won't lie, I thought Lara was lying to me about the type of person Janet was. Someone who enforced unfair rules on the new arrivals just because of age gaps would not take the time to prepare a welcoming speech for the first time we ever met. Little did I know that the bull crap that I would have put up with, only to get convinced that the truth is the exact opposite of that. I look back at that and I can't help but cringe as I remember how sincere she was trying to be, knowing that she would not hesitate to kick me the heck out of my home if she had the right to. After a few more days, when everything was in its place and our home was pretty much finished, I started going on evening walks with my dog. Usually I would go on morning and evening walks with her, but I wasn't too familiar with the neighborhood yet, and I was worried about the time when other dog parents would be out walking their dogs. One thing I have to note about my dog is that I adopted her at about 6 or 7 months ago, and she had been abused and starved and harmed in every way possible. Getting her to trust me and my boyfriend was a big hassle. I didn't want her to feel overwhelmed by running into too many dogs or people. She doesn't even bark or leap at the passerbyers. She just gets really shaky and scared and whiny, and it breaks my heart every time. I had to make sure that she would enjoy the walk if I was taking her out on it. After a few weeks, I decided Roxy was finally ready to be walked in the morning. I knew the streets pretty well and would probably be a bit busy at this time during our walk to the park on the busy Sunday morning. I ran into many neighbors, as I usually do, only this time there was something weird about some of them. There were a couple of them that would usually come up and strike a conversation with me and my boyfriend and the HOA meeting that walked past me, completely ignoring me now that I was walking with the dog. I felt kind of weird about it because I could tell that they've seen and recognized me, but decided to ignore me. I let that go immediately because I know everyone's entitled to personal space, so if they don't wish to speak to me outside of the meetings, so be it. Things changed after I started walking my dogs in the morning. I remember that day very clearly because I ended up making it a bit late to the meeting. Specifically because I was walking my dog right before it, and as soon as I walked in, Janet stopped talking entirely and everyone sat in awkward silence and looked at me as I found a way to my seat. I was already embarrassed as it was my tomato-tainted face displaying it only made it worse. Janet still felt the need to put emphasis on me being late for the first time, and she said that she hopes I haven't found some other occupation that would steer me from tending to my duties toward my home and the neighborhood, making it seem like the 10 or 15 minutes I missed from the meeting were going to be the reason the world ends or the neighborhood gets abolished. I should have known at the time that the reason she reacted that way wasn't that I was late, nor was it because there were meetings that were important. No, it was because one of her rat friends snitched to her about me having a dog and probably being late because of it in the meeting right before I was even there. Lara came to talk to me that day and told me that she felt really bad for the situation I was put in because she had been in it too, herself. Janet, see, she's a cat person, and she walks and talks and acts accordingly. And apparently hating dog and dog owners was also part of that walk, talk, and act like a cat person in her book. Lara warned me that calling me out on the meeting was only the beginning, and that she herself had really struggled at the start of her moving here to gain Janet's respect, simply because she had dogs too. After that meeting, my boyfriend told me that he had been noticing that Janet would pause on her walks to look at her home. I did think it was odd, but I didn't think much of it, simply because I was too busy with my life to sit and put the pieces together. Then, she starts going on morning walks and conveniently around that time that I walk my dog. One day, I was outside with my dog and I was on a phone call, so when my dog stopped to do her business, I turned my back to her and got a bit too invested in my call. I ended up forgetting to pick up my dog's poop, which I must not have. It was very small and also we're at a dog park that was far away from the neighborhood. Then I suddenly heard a loud familiar voice booming from behind me telling me to stop. Of course, it was none other than Janet herself, who had been stalking me and my dog on our walk, hoping to catch me slipping up, and unfortunately, well, she did. Unfortunately for her, though, she caught me on the wrong day, because today I got the time. As soon as she got to me and I confirmed that her tone would not be respected, let alone understanding, I stood up for myself big time. I told her that she needed to keep herself wrapped up in her own life instead of mine and my poor dog's, and that if she didn't, I wouldn't hesitate to take extreme measures to remind her to keep to her own beeswax. I walked away from her because I found more value in my cell phone call, and because I was fuming with rage. I woke up the next day feeling kind of guilty because of how I handled the situation, but that guilt sizzled away as soon as I went to check my mail and found a hefty fine just laying there in the mailbox. She had fined me for the poop that my dog took in a dog park, completely out of her authority as well as her business. Well, not only was the fee out of pocket for the quote crime committed, but there was also a fee for leaving out dog toys in my front yard. The second fee wasn't as hefty as the first, but the audacity. The following meeting, I went up to her, rage slowly building up inside me, and I asked to speak to her in private for a moment. But she dismissed the idea and told me that anything I would say to her in private, I can say to her in front of her friends whom I had now grown to recognize and hate. I explained to her that I always picked up after my dog immediately. I was just having a horrible day at work, and the only reason I had forgotten to pick up the dog poop was that I was on a work call that was both urgent and delicate. Despite knowing I should have been a tad bit more careful, it didn't matter much because I was at a dog park, and one that was very well far from our neighborhood. And not only that, but I asked for clarification on the fee for the dog toy in our yard. She had no right to tell us what we can put in our yard. Are you kidding me? Since, it's our private property. And she had no right to indulge herself in our private life at her will. Her response was a list of new rules, and she just felt strangely tailored to discriminate against the dog owners in the neighborhood, huh? The fines for dog excretions got cripplingly doubled, and garden accessories that damaged the value of the surrounding properties also became a thing. If you ask me, I just say she put up the rule to get me to put away my dog toys. But little did she know that I was not about to be like every other dog owner in the neighborhood that let her walk all over them because of her little title as the president of this silly itty-bitty club that she was going on about. I understand that it takes a lot to keep a neighborhood safe, and that the responsibility of an HOA president got to her head. But to enforce these rules specifically targeting dog owners seems like a personal vendetta, not an HOA president trying to protect her neighborhood. Some time passed after the incident, and Janet's vendetta against my dog and me only seemed to worsen. Usually, when a new policy is introduced, it's a result of something happening in the neighborhood that the HOA board goes over. In the following meeting, the HOA president presents it to everyone and explains why they found it necessary to put up the new rule. Ever since I stood up to Janet for stalking me and my dog, she's been pumping out new policies left and right. It became increasingly evident that all these policies targeted dogs and their owners insisted of protecting and caring for the neighborhood. For example, it became prohibited to walk pets before 8 a.m. and past 6 p.m. Guys, I usually walk my dog at 7 before I go to work, and at 4 or 5 after I come back. Sometimes, if I have some free time to spare, or if my dog is fidgety, energetic, I would take her out at 8 or 9 after dinner. This rule was going to mess with my daily routine. So, when the meeting was over, I went up to Janet to talk to her about it before she slithers out of the meeting like she always does after enforcing these crazy rules. I wasn't the only one either. Once she saw that I was not the only person that wanted to talk to her about it, she told us that it was because the residents of the neighborhood were simply complaining about their mornings and evenings being disturbed by the loud noises that their fellow pet-owning residents were causing on their daily walks. I'm not entirely sure what, quote, noise our pets, or I should say dogs at this point, as she was referring to, make. Perhaps it was the sound of their claws just touching the pavement that somehow disturbed the hard-earned inner peace of the people. I had to hold back the laughter because it got to a point where it was impossible not to tell that she was just carrying out her personal vendetta against dogs. As funny and absurd as that sounds. Well, guess what? She apologized and excused herself that day, and I made the decision then and there that I was done putting up with her bullcrap. So, as soon as the sound of her annoying heels faded, I grabbed the attention of the neighbors next to me that went to talk to her about the rule, and realized that I was not the only one noticing just how bizarre the whole situation had gotten. What's up, everybody? Mr. Edito here. Oh my, this HOA dispute is an absolute nightmare. Personally, I could not put up with that. We do have a few updates to get into. I hope you guys are having a great day. If you're not subscribed to the channel, take a second right now and click that subscribe button. You don't want to miss these daily videos and all the updates that come with it. Here is update number 1, the situation with Miss Johnson. Wow, this has sure escalated since I last shared my story. Up until this point, I last talked about it in my previous post. Well, things have been very civil between us. I didn't want to stir any drama because I was the newbie in the neighborhood. But as the fines started racking up and my privacy was being breached, I had no choice but to confront her about the reason behind her actions. I knew that it was a conversation that I needed to have with her, if I wanted to have the comfort of walking my dog without the risk of getting fined for some crazy bullcrap rule I didn't even remember existed. I tried talking to her in private many times, but I was blatantly ignored. And I mean it. She would pick up her phone and excuse herself, then leave without coming back or come up with some crap excuse to tap out of the conversation. The following meeting, I made the delightful decision to turn it into a group discussion, considering it as well. And the fact that she kept dismissing me every time I tried to talk to her in private. As I was explaining to her and the people in the room that having a pet, most specifically a dog, was becoming a hassle because of these dumb rules. I told her that I found them unnecessary and very burdensome. They really didn't do anything to improve the neighborhood, but they made owning a dog a lot harder than it should be. She asked me what I wanted, and I told her that it would certainly improve the quality of my life, and that of my fellow dog owner neighbors, if the list of dog rules were shrunk by a solid, 95 percentile. I was more than okay with fines for leaving dog poop, even though it's really not that deep. But having to pay loads of money because a dog barks as a dog does, or a dog being walked without their leash when they've been leash trained, just seems too much. Well, I also mentioned how ridiculous it was that there was a weight limit for the dogs because there was absolutely no logical reason why the HOA would need to keep dog weight under control. Absolutely none. She went quiet for a few seconds before she started going off about how inconsiderate my request was, how selfish I was for not wanting my bank account drained over dog crap. That's not really how she said it, but that's what the core of it was. I told her that I wasn't the one and only that found the rules unfair and discriminatory, and I guess she really didn't like the word discriminatory, because she went from calm and collected to nearly spitting out slurs at me. She said that she found it funny how the association had kept the neighborhood a valuable and enjoyable residency for years, yet I started crying and weeping about the conservatory rules as soon as my boxes were unloaded. I told her that it was not the fact that the rules were a thing. It was just that they weren't doing anything other than hindering my day-to-day life. Not only mine, but that of everyone else that had a dog. I tried my best to showcase that I wasn't me just acting like a brat, or trying to rebrand the neighborhood, but that I, like many of my fellow neighbors, had had enough of what she was doing, this one person doing despite everyone around them's disapproval. Well, she wasn't expecting anyone to stand up against what she was doing, and her reaction to me doing so proved it. I don't even think there was a moment of hesitation or reluctance in which she thought through the righteousness of her actions, like she didn't even care to question the credibility of what I was saying. She kept escalating the conversation to the point where the straight up just called me a brat. That got to me, and I had to fight against every atom of my being, not to snap right back at her, but I was on a mission, and I didn't want the people present in the room to see me step to her level. I was going to need their help. I told her that it should be a public matter, and everybody should be able to get a say on it, but she wasn't even willing to consider it. that she needed to let us speak our minds on the rules and regulations as well, because that was one of the HOA's policies, and her relentless dismissal of our disapproval only proved that she was a dog-hating person that was willing to ignore the entire neighborhood to support such a wrongful belief. She looked at me for a few seconds before deciding the conversation was concluded. She just looked everywhere and asked if anyone else had any questions before she picked up her keys and her bag and walked out the door. I looked around and saw that people were equally as confused as I was, but I guess they just decided to leave it at that as they started getting up and walking out one after the other. I'm not sure what needs to be done about the situation, but this has to stop, and I'm going to have to stop it myself. Let me know. What would you do in a situation like this? Or maybe, what do you think I need to do? Just to get her to stop carrying out this dog-hating mission that she refuses to acknowledge. Update number 2. Hey, so since the last community meeting, I talked to my boyfriend about what happened and what I intended on doing to change the current situation because it's simply out of hand. Not only that, but I felt humiliated in front of everyone, and I'm not about to let that slide. During this whole ordeal and after the previous meeting, a lot of neighbors reached out to me. Some of them even came knocking on my door when they couldn't get their hands on any contact information of mine. Well, that puts things into perspective for me. Just how sick and tired of everything that everyone is of putting up with her. Not entirely sure how such an insufferable person could get such a position and stay in it for as long as she did. During the next meeting, things took a turn for the worse. We went about the meeting as we always do, and towards the end, when Janet was asking if anyone had anything to say, I stepped in and told her that the neighbors and I have decided to stop abiding by the dog-hating rules, that we're no longer going to pay for the fines unless reasonable and fair rules are presented to replace them. Rules that were not only fair, but that we would have to say and vote on. Some of the neighbors participated in the conversation, but I noticed that a lot of the ones that had previously said they would speak up just sat in their seats with their tails tucked between their legs. Which I found weird because nobody had forced them to talk to me. And they seemed annoyed and mad when they did. It was mostly the seniors, which I know understand is probably because they know how unresponsive that woman is because she was once again listening to all of our arguments and demands with her thumbs in her ears. Why? Well, because she insisted that the rules were there for the sake of the community, and that if anyone does not agree with the rules of the neighborhood, they were more than free to get out, as if it was up for her to say. She said that she finds it stupid that we felt the need to unite to speak up about these rules, and that we should grow up and just adopt or be left behind. Which I'm not sure what that even means, but the conversation came to a dead halt once again. Just like the last time, she hastily got her things after abruptly asking if anyone had anything further to say, and the conversation with her ended there. I don't think I'm willing to give up just yet, but seeing how some of my neighbors backed up on their promise today just rubbed me the wrong way. Because some of them were dog owners as well, and well, they had me believing that they would rally up with me, only to sit there and let her wreak havoc again, as she pleases. Update number 3. After my conversation with Janet and the rest of the neighbors that were willing to stand up for themselves against her injustice, and after realizing that words weren't going through to her, I decided to take things just a step further. There was a brief moment of doubt where I thought I might not be doing the right thing, but then I remembered how my previous residency was, and how other communities usually have presidents that go above and beyond to tend to the duties and responsibilities they do. Intentionally carrying out a vendetta against dogs that was crippling my life and draining my bank account wasn't cutting it for me, and the topic became too frequent on my mind. So, I decided to end things once and for all. I stopped by a tech store on my way home and bought one of those discrete monitors for a surprisingly low price and brought it with me to the next community meeting. I go into the meeting room an hour before the meeting starts because I didn't know when anyone would be there, and I didn't want to get caught planting the camera. That gave me the time just to set up the monitor properly, so it had a good angle on the entire room. I brought up the conversation once again, and did not hesitate to use words I knew would get on Janet's nerves. I wanted to get something out of her that I could present to the board and either have them talk to her or have her removed altogether. The conversation went to crap quickly, once again, with her refusing to let me finish most of my sentences and jumping to use questionable descriptive language, and I was regretting stirring up the pot again. Only temporarily, that is. Once the meeting was finished, I was the first to leave. I couldn't even stand to be in the same room as the woman. I felt like I was the only one doing something because while most of my neighbors were opposed to Janet's behavior, no one even tried to intervene when she was scolding me like a child. Even when some of them told me personally, face to face, that they were willing to take action to get her removed. I guess their idea of doing something was to participate in the conversation once. But as soon as that failed, they stopped caring. I'm not sure what to make of it. I'm really not. I ended up forgetting about the camera until I was sitting in my car, on the verge of breaking down in tears. I went back to get it and found Janet with one of the only 3 or 4 people that still stood to look at her face. I could hear chit-chats in the hallway as I was walking toward the meeting room, but it stopped as soon as I walked in and just, stared at me in silence. Realizing that I would not be able to fetch the camera just yet, I turned around and went back to my car. I was to fetch it another day, since I couldn't go extract my little spy camera with them just sitting awkwardly and vengefully staring at me. I just thought I would get your thoughts on this, and if you guys think I took it a step too far. I'm honestly so over this whole situation, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get it over with. Update number 4. Well, it's been a few days since I last posted, and I have some crazy good news for you. I'm really glad that the camera was left there because it seems Janet and her dear little friend/human pet got a bit too comfortable trash-talking the neighborhood, especially the dogs. There was even a point in the conversation where Janet said that she, too, was over me constantly bringing up the stupid freaking dogs and wished they'd all just drop dead so I can get over it and let her worry about the big issues like her pedicures and cheating husband, and I couldn't believe what I was listening to. I'm not sure how to feel about the discovery because of the things they were talking about and the depth of hatred Janet was towards dogs, and now I'm beyond disturbed. Someone like that doesn't deserve any form of authority, let alone authority over rules and laws of an entire neighborhood. Now that I had the evidence to prove the unworthiness of her position, I went up to Janet herself the following community meeting and told her that I suspected that one of her friends was recording me when I was talking to her to ridicule me. Janet, being Janet, dismissed me immediately, telling me that it's something that they would never do, which might be true, but she also told me that recording the room was not against the building rules and that everyone's free to do whatever they want. So, if that were the case, she wasn't willing to do anything about it. She was only saying that because I was talking about one of her human pets, but little did she know that it was nothing to smile about, and that the grin she had on her face as I expressed my concerns to her would come back to bite her in the very butt soon. I went home that day without specks of doubt in my mind that the video was going straight to the internet. If she can run her mouth saying the foulest things audible to mankind about poor dogs, I hope she can explain those reasonings behind such a disgusting statement. And for her own very sake, I hope they're valid. Update number 5. Final update posted by OP. Janet came to my home multiple times, but since the tables turned, I gave her a taste of her own medicine. I ignored her. I would let her knock for however many minutes and watch her storm off from my window. That is, of course, until the following community meeting, where we were all blessed with the presence of an all-7 HOA board member meeting, who were there to tell us that Janet was no longer going to be the HOA president, seeing that her recent scandal had gotten quite the traction and seemed to clasp the attention of a lot of people in our city. Janet will also face significant fines and legal action as a result of this. I took the opportunity to ask them if they could review the most recent rules, and of course regulations that were put in place. And they said they'll go over for them and make sure that everything's sorted out through and justice is served. They then promised that they would help our community move on from this setback and just thrive in the future. They also apologized for everything and made some promises. Then they were gone just as quickly as they came. Quite honestly with you, they didn't seem to be invested in the whole situation and were probably only doing this because they didn't want the neighborhood's value to skyrocket down because of online memes about dogs that she hated. But a win is a win. I'll happily take this win because I will finally be able to sleep at night knowing that my walks with my dog were not going to be stalked, fined, disrespected, or belittled by a miserable old lady that takes out her rage at the poor dogs and their owners. Thanks, guys, for listening. Oh boy. Miss Johnson. She's one of those people that we read about sometimes. Usually she's a mother-in-law or maybe a local Karen, but this time she was in the form of an HOA president, coming up with rules left and right. But the craziest part of this entire story to me is not the fact that she was so absolutely toxic. It was that nobody else stood up to her for years. And it took this new person, OP of the story, and the significant other, to fight this and finally get something to happen when they set up the camera. I would like to hear from you guys. What would you do? Maybe you've struggled with the HOA before and you have experience. Drop it in the comment section. Let's talk about it. My name is Mr. Reddito. If you're new to the channel, I narrate, animate, and do all sorts of videos every single day. So stick around, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.